wondered what it would take for a country to tear itself in two, to turn brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor. For America, this wasn't a hypothetical question. It was a brutal reality that nearly destroyed the nation before it could even celebrate its first century. This is the story of the day America broke apart and how it painfully, heroically, stitched itself back together. Before the first shots were fired, America was a nation deeply divided. Imagine two different worlds existing under one flag. In the north, industry was booming, cities were growing, factories were humming, and the economy was built on free labor. The future, for many northerners, looked like a world of innovation and progress. But in the south, life moved to a different rhythm. The economy was overwhelmingly agricultural, dominated by massive plantations growing crops like cotton and tobacco. This entire system, this entire way of life, was built on the backs of millions of enslaved African Americans. It was a system of immense wealth for a few, built on profound human suffering. For decades, these two Americas tried to coexist. Politicians made compromises, drew lines on maps, and tried to balance the power between states that allowed slavery and those that didn't. But it was like trying to patch a dam that was cracking under immense pressure. The core issue, slavery, was a moral and economic wound that refused to heal. Was America a nation dedicated to freedom for all, as its founding documents declared? Or was it a nation that would protect the right of some men to own others? These weren't just abstract debates. They were passionate, deeply held beliefs. Southerners felt their entire economic structure and way of life were under attack. They championed the idea of states' rights, arguing that the federal government had no business telling them how to live. Northerners, meanwhile, grew increasingly vocal in their opposition to slavery, with a powerful abolitionist movement calling for its immediate end. The tension was electric. In the halls of Congress, words turned into threats, and sometimes even physical violence. The nation was a powder keg, and all it needed was a spark. That spark came on April 12, 1861. In the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina, Confederate forces, representing the newly formed government of the seceded Southern states, opened fire on Fort Sumter, a U.S. federal fort. Those cannon blasts weren't just an attack on a military installation, they were a declaration. The long, tense argument was over. The time for fighting had begun. The United States of America was no more. In its place were two warring nations, the Union in the north, fighting to preserve the country, and the Confederacy in the south, fighting to create a new one founded on the principle of slavery. Both sides believed they were in the right. Both believed they were defending their homes, their families, and their vision for the future. Young men rushed to enlist, convinced the war would be over in a few months. They couldn't have been more wrong. What followed was the costliest, most brutal conflict in American history. The Civil War wasn't fought on distant battlefields against a foreign enemy. It was fought in American fields, on American rivers, and in American towns. It was a war that pitted family members against one another. A brother in a blue Union uniform might find himself aiming his rifle at his own cousin in a gray Confederate coat. The romantic notions of a quick, glorious war quickly dissolved into the grim reality of mud, disease, and unimaginable carnage. Battles like Antietam, Gettysburg, and Shiloh became infamous for their staggering death tolls. On a single day at Antietam, more Americans were killed or wounded than on any other day in the nation's history. The total number of lives lost in the Civil War is estimated to be over 620,000. The war's devastation wasn't limited to the battlefield. Cities like Atlanta and Richmond were left in ruins, burned to the ground. The Southern economy, already strained, completely collapsed. Farms were destroyed, infrastructure was shattered, and civilians faced starvation. The nation was bleeding, and its very future hung in the balance. In the midst of this darkness, one figure stood as a beacon of resolve: President Abraham Lincoln. When the war began, Lincoln's primary goal was simple, yet monumental: to save the Union. He refused to accept the legitimacy of the Confederacy, arguing that the nation was indivisible. He was a master politician, but also a man of deep moral conviction, and the weight of the war pressed heavily on his shoulders. As the conflict raged on, its purpose began to evolve. Lincoln realized that preserving the Union was not enough. The root cause of the war, slavery, had to be confronted directly. On January 1, 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. This executive order declared that all enslaved people in the Confederate States shall be thenceforward and forever free. This was a revolutionary moment. It transformed the war from a political struggle over union into a moral crusade for human freedom. It opened the door for nearly 200,000 African American men to enlist in the Union Army and Navy, fighting bravely for their own liberation and the soul of the country. The war was no longer just about reuniting a broken nation. It was about forging a new nation, one truer to its founding ideal that all men are created equal. Lincoln's powerful words, especially in his Gettysburg Address, redefined the American experiment, dedicating it to a new birth of freedom. After 4 long, bloody years, the war finally came to an end in the spring of 1865. The Union had won. The Confederacy was defeated. The nation was, technically, whole again. The 13th Amendment was passed, formally and forever abolishing slavery in the United States. But victory on the battlefield was only the beginning of a new, incredibly difficult chapter. The challenge was immense. How do you rebuild a shattered South? How do you integrate millions of newly freed African Americans into the life of the nation? And perhaps most difficult of all, how do you unite a people who had just spent 4 years trying to kill each other? This period, known as Reconstruction, was fraught with conflict and pain. There were incredible steps forward as black men gained the right to vote and hold political office for the first time. But there was also fierce, violent resistance from white Southerners who sought to restore the old social order. It was a messy, complicated, and often tragic era, but it was absolutely essential. It was the painful process of America's rebirth. The war had broken the country, but in its aftermath, a stronger, more just, and more unified nation had the chance to emerge from the ashes. The American Civil War stands as a powerful reminder that unity is fragile and that freedom must be defended. It shows that even in its darkest hour, a nation can find the strength to heal its deepest wounds and rededicate itself to its highest ideals. It's a story of division and destruction, but ultimately, it's a story of reunification and the enduring promise of a more perfect union. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as compelling as we do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. Let us know in the comments what part of this history resonates with you the most. We'll see you in the next video.